Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome, listeners. You've got the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Broadcast Network. I'm your host, Davis Ellington, here as we're getting ready for what is the Christmas morning of fantasy football fans. Week 1 kicking off this weekend. Sunday football, a full slate of action on hand for everyone as your teams are going to get locked and loaded with Week 1 getting underway. Thursday, of course, we had the Bears and the Packers game, and fantasy-wise, unless you had a defense in that one, you weren't really too happy with the outcome. So you got a little taste of action there. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the season with Week 1's games coming up here, and we're going to take a look this entire show really over just some good matchups to exploit, things like that, some strategies, and preemptively talk you off the cliff of panicking after a potential Week 1 loss, as some people are going to have to go through it, sad but true. But Week 1 brings so much excitement. You've drafted your team, whether it be a month ago or yesterday, and you've been looking at your computer screen just itching to see those games get underway and see if you were able to crack the code and if you're set up for early success in the season as we get going here. And really not too much offense to speak of course, in Thursday night's game. Tariq Cohen, not a bad day if you have him in a PPR league. The Chicago change of pace running back was targeted 10 times in that passing game, 8 receptions for 49 yards. Not a bad day for him, but with no one for the Bears finding the end zone, he was really the guy to have, either him or Allen Robinson. Other than that, really nothing going on. Rodgers, an underperforming day for him. Nothing too great. The one touchdown pass on the box out by Jimmy Graham as he went up and snagged the only touchdown of the game for his Packers. They go on, of course, to win 10-3. The two defenses, though, were the stories of that one. And if you spent high on that Chicago Bears defense, you felt like it was a pretty good move after watching them play in that first game of the season. They looked electric out there. They were just ball hawking everywhere. And, of course, though, a lot of people sat off the defense, don't want to spend that early round pick on your defense, and don't be freaking out. Don't think like you made a mistake. It's just the first game of the season. It's all about tampering expectations here as you get underway with the season beginning on Sunday. We're going to first look at the quarterback position going in to Week 1, and with some really good matchups. If you were able to wait and you got a good value quarterback, you could be in for a really nice Week 1 of points, especially in a couple areas. Of course, the obvious that we have to state is the man himself, Drew Brees for the New Orleans Saints. It looks like he's going to put a barrage of points up on the board for you if you have him. If you sit Drew Brees in Week 1, that's a terrible move. You're going to be off to a bad start. And if you're playing Drew Brees Week 1, you can't be feeling too good, as he's going to be in the Superdome against the Houston Texans. The Texans, not a bad defense by any means, but it's Breeze. It's Week 1 at home. You know that a lot of points are going to be scored by that Saints offense. Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas are full goes. They have Jared Cook as their new tight end, and we've seen with Jimmy Graham's career what Drew Brees can do with a capable, athletic tight end. So that's going to be a good game to watch. If you have really anyone in that Saints offense, you're going to be having a pretty solid start to your Sunday. Couple other quarterbacks that really, I think, could draw some interest. Carson Wentz, some people really buying high on the Red Rocket out of North Dakota State, and he's a guy that in that Eagles offense has looked great at times, but sometimes almost has so many weapons that the points get kind of spread out a little bit and he doesn't produce what you're expecting. Look for him to have a big game against the Washington Redskins that really have no defensive identity at this moment in time. They're really focused on their quarterback situation with Dwayne Haskins, the rookie out of Ohio State. So look for Carson Wentz to be able to put up some points for you early in the season and really hopefully try to work off paying off what was most likely a high value slot at the quarterback spot for Carson, especially with Andrew Luck going down by retiring. Carson Wentz was one of the guys that really benefited from that in the fantasy spectrum by being picked a lot higher because that's one less top-tier quarterback, and Wentz was kind of the assumed role taker of that next rung up as far as fantasy football quarterbacks go. So Carson Wentz, a guy to play. And then another one that I think is going to be really fun to watch, if you have him on your team, you might want to start him just to see what happens. It's going to be Lamar Jackson against the Miami Dolphins. With that porous defense, anyone on the Ravens really is looking like a good bet to give you some offensive production in fantasy football, and that's going to be led by Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. Of course, this is his first full season under center. He is the guy now in Baltimore, and he has some good weapons, especially the weapon I'd like to note. Mark Ingram as the running back is looking poised for a good day in his first debut for the Ravens, but Lamar Jackson, he can throw it, he can run it. He's been working on his accuracy a lot in the offseason, and those legs always a threat to eat up yardage. He's a true dual-threat quarterback. Haven't seen anyone this fast really since Vic at the quarterback spot. So really look for Lamar Jackson to be a juggernaut of points potentially against the Dolphins, as they're going to need to figure out a way to stop his feet and his throwing, and he can beat you with either. He's a really nice pick. I like Lamar. You probably were able to wait a couple extra rounds on him as well, so you could really see a big payoff in week one. And then we're going to go over to the West Coast for our next quarterback to watch, and that's going to be the man coming off of what was a season-ending surgery, Jimmy Garoppolo, back in action for the 49ers. He gets a favorable matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I really think Garoppolo's got a shot to reestablish himself in the league. He wants to announce his presence with authority coming back from the injury, so look for him to be aggressive, trying to light up the scoreboard, and what should really be a high-scoring affair by both sides. Winston and Garoppolo both feel like they have something to prove. Both are going to come out guns blazing. Of course, Winston's got that big weapon in Mike Evans, so look for him to be going there early and often. The wide receiver core for the 49ers, a little up in the air. Dante Pettis was the assumed number one. He didn't look like that according to some reports in preseason, but it still seems like he's got that spot. And of course, you got George Kittle at tight end. Couple of other installments at running back, Tevin Coleman back there in the backfield for the 49ers. So Garoppolo's got some weapons, and I think they're going to try to air him out. He's going to probably be held back a little bit in the first quarter. They want to be a little cautious getting back up to game speed, but I could foresee Garoppolo really trying to go after people, get those big yards, get those touchdowns, and really show his team and his fan base that he is back and he's ready to lead this team to the playoffs. So that's a guy definitely to keep your eye on. And then really around the league and at the quarterback spot, you got Roethlisberger and Brady dueling out in New England. That'll be interesting to watch. With no AB, how does Roethlisberger disperse the targets? Of course, Juju Smith-Schuster is going to get all he can handle, but can someone else step up in that Patriots wide receiver room and give Juju some help, give Roethlisberger another option? And of course, Tom Brady is going to be Tom Brady. He's going to dump off to his running backs, Sony Michel and James White. He's going to use Edelman. Philip Dorsett might see a little action as well. You got Josh Gordon now suiting up for the Patriots. It's going to be a fun team to watch. All those weapons, how are they going to go about carving up defenses? But that's really the look at the quarterback situation going in to the season. Marcus Mariota for the Titans is really big question mark right now. He was being bought pretty high the last couple seasons, but after last year, he's really dropped. You might even be able to grab him on the free agent market. He's a backup, really, but he could be a guy to see as he's going to try to regain some traction in the league. He's got the Cleveland Browns in a matchup that, you just might see him edge it out. He's got Derrick Henry behind him running the ball really, really well. And, just if Mariota can get some space, get some time by getting the other team focused on stopping the big Alabama running back, you might be able to get him some extra time in the pocket to make some passes, make some plays downfield for you, and really get himself going in that Titans offense. But the quarterback position in fantasy football is one that can rotate. It's like a defense or a kicker. You can kind of play your matchups. You don't really need to keep that one guy slotted in. And we saw last night with Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, obviously, and historically one of the best quarterbacks the NFL has had, really having trouble with that Chicago Bears defense last night. He really struggled, just the one touchdown, really just one good quarter in that second quarter, threw for about 132 yards. But after that, and before that in the first, was just getting beaten into the ground by that Bears pass rush. So if you see a defense going up against your quarterback and you got a guy, not necessarily like Rodgers, but a Roethlisberger type or a Kirk Cousins, you don't need to play them and just hope for the best. There's always options on the free agent market to go to and try to, exploit some matchups. Of course, it's week one. You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be going with your guys, rolling out your A lineup and kind of just seeing what you got. And we're going to continue to give you a little bit of a look at what you've got going into week one. We'll come back. We're going to look at the running back and wide receiver positions when we return after a short break here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, fantasy football fans. Davis Ellington here with you as we jump back in to this look ahead to week one. We're going to be continuing with our breakdown of the positions here going into your first fantasy week matchup. We know you're going to be on the couch. You got the chips, you got the dip, you got the big screen TV going. You got people over. People are yelling, screaming, banging on the couch. If you're laughing, you're crying. All the emotions of week one are going to really be coming out, of course, as you're looking for your team to produce. You want that early win, gain some confidence in your guys that you drafted. And, of course, no one wants to be 0-1. You got that fear of going 0-2, 0-3. You spiral. Next thing you know, whatever your league's punishment is knocking on your doorstep. We're trying to avoid that here, and no better way to get started on avoiding that hellish fate than a week one win. And we talked about quarterbacks. Now we're going to talk about running backs and wide receivers, your skill positions here for week one, and just a couple matchups here that we really like at the Fantasy Football Podcast, and maybe give you a little insight as to who to play if you've got a little toss-up in your head about which way you want to go with your team. The first running back on the block that has a lot to prove, and because of that, attacking a less than stellar defense might be able to gash him for some big carries and maybe a couple of goal line punch-in touchdowns, is Leonard Fournette out of Jacksonville. Going up against the Chiefs, you know it's going to be a shootout. Jacksonville with Nick Foles is going to most likely try to kill the tempo a little bit at the beginning at least. Look to Fournette to establish the run so that Foles will have time in the pocket, can use the play action. So Fournette's really going to be a pace setter here in that Jacksonville game against the Chiefs, trying to counteract Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Damian Williams, Travis Kelce. So many weapons. Jacksonville has their one big one in the backfield that they're going to need to go to. If they get in short yardage situations, goal line situations, it's going to be Fournette getting those touches. So look for Leonard Fournette to really have the chance to have a big game against this Kansas City Chiefs defense. He's a guy going into a year. He's looking for a bounce back. He's done everything right. Now it's time for him to prove it come week one. And then we're going to jump over. We already talked about him a little bit. Mark Ingram suiting up for Baltimore. Got a great matchup against the Dolphins. One of, if not the worst defense in the National Football League. And you know Ingram's going to try to show that he was worth it as he's making his debut for the Ravens. And we've seen Ray Rice have so much success in that backfield. He was a top fantasy option for a while there. Mark Ingram could be just the same. He was so good, even in the 1B role with Alvin Kamara in that Saints backfield. He can catch passes, he can run through the tackles, he's good in space, he can make guys miss. A great all-around athlete. Look for him to really have a big game. And with Lamar Jackson, with his first start of the season, week 1, obviously, but also really just becoming that first-time, franchise quarterback. That's at least what the Ravens are hoping he's going to do. He's going to look to Mark Ingram a lot. He should get a lot of touches. Will Ingram catch some passes out of the backfield as well? There's really not too much in the way of talent behind Mark Ingram, so it's his backfield. He's going to get the majority of the plays called for him, so look for Mark to really have a good week 1 for his Baltimore Ravens. And then we're going to come back again. We've talked about this game as well with Garoppolo and Jameis Winston going at it. Matt Breida, the running back for the Niners, could have a big game. Tevin Coleman has not impressed as far as reports have gone for the Niners, and it looks like Breida is going to have the lead back role in that backfield going up against a Bucs defense. Yes, they have Ndamukong Suh, but still are a couple sandwiches short of a picnic on the defensive side of the ball. They have some holes that they really need to address, and the Niners are going to look to take advantage, especially early on. Look for the running back for the Niners to really get a lot of touches. Garoppolo with some check down looks, trying to get his feet under him, trying to get comfortable. He's a veteran guy in that backfield. They're going to lean on him most likely against this Bucs team. They want to get that week 1 win. They're at home, so he should have a really good shot. That's a flex player. That's a guy that could really be on the play-don't-play line for your team, and he could possibly, jump up and bite you, get you double-digit points, and get you on your way to your first win of the fantasy football season in 2019. And the other really big running back I want to talk about, which is really more of a tandem, is that New England Patriots backfield. You can't really buy the wrong item there. You got Sony Michel, you got James White. Both guys did so well last season in that tandem backfield setup, and they're going to do it again this year. Michel with the 6 postseason touchdowns as a rookie, the most the NFL has seen. He should be getting a bigger workload. He's that workhorse for New England. And James White, that change of pace, third down running back that can catch passes oh so well. He makes people miss. Either one of those guys is really a must-start against a Pittsburgh team that, though they got guys like T.J. Watt there, they're really not going to be able to stop those running backs. They're going to have to focus a lot of effort on stopping those running backs. And you know that Bill Belichick's going to want to get those guys out in space and play with those toys he's got in the backfield for him right there. So either New England guy is a great play, and that's one of the few backfields that you can really start either one and feel good about it. Mark Ingram and Kamara last season and the year before in New Orleans were like that, where either one was going to yield you points. This is a very similar scenario. New England is really a running back haven right now for fantasy owners. Either one's a good start in my book. And then the other guy to look at, coming off of a Pro Bowl year out of nowhere, basically dropped out of the sky and into Hawaii for the Pro Bowl, is Phillip Lindsay from Denver. An undersized running back that just proved the league wrong last year. He took that starting job. Royce Freeman's still his backup out there. And with a new quarterback under center for the Broncos, look for Phillip Lindsay to be leaned on a bit more. He had some huge games against the Raiders last season. He's opening Monday night against them in Oakland. Phillip Lindsay, a guy that could really go for some big points. The Raiders have upgraded that defensive front, but with a lot of rookies, Lindsay might be able to get out into space if there's any sort of breakdowns and coverages. He's a tough guy to tackle in the open field. He's small, he's elusive, but he's strong, don't get me wrong. So he's a guy that really could have big play potential written all over him, and we all know the Raiders are a team that can give up the big play defensively. So those running backs are the ones we like here on the Fantasy Football Podcast. As we now turn our attention to wide receivers, first look, we're going to go back to what could be an exciting game in Jacksonville between the Chiefs and the Jaguars. D.D. Westbrook, the wide receiver for the Jaguars, he's going to be coming as the number one guy. He's going to be the one that Foles is going to be looking to in the passing game early and often. Look for D.D. Westbrook to really have a big game against a Chiefs secondary that has been depleted over the last couple of seasons. And they're great because they're also going to need to keep up with the Patty Mahomes offense. Foles is going to be airing it out if they keep scoring over there on the Chiefs side. Look for Westbrook to be on the receiving end of those bombs. Then you also want to turn, this is one of my favorite matchups of one of the guys I really think is going to have not just a big game, but a big season. And that's out in Cincinnati, Tyler Boyd. There's been hype already around him. I'm not the first one with this breaking news. As with A.J. Green getting hurt. They have Joe Mixon, a very good running back, but they just really have no options in that passing game. Tyler Eifert at tight end is touch and go, hit and miss. But really, you got Tyler Boyd, a really good season last year, looking to build on it. He's the huge target for Andy Dalton, especially without A.J. Green there with his field-stretching, all-pro talents. Tyler Boyd is going to have more targets that he'll know what to do with, and that's going to start week 1 against Seattle. Again, a secondary that is not what it used to be. The Legion of Boom is no longer. Tyler Boyd's going to look to exploit that, get some big points early. He's a guy that you could have bought kind of low on, a wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 3 is where he was going a lot of drafts, and he might be able to prove you right week 1 with a big game against Seattle. And then we're going to look again to a big divisional matchup. We already talked earlier about the Bears and the Packers. Now we're talking about another great rivalry, the Giants and the Cowboys. We all know that Amari Cooper's the man in Dallas, but who are the Giants going to counter with? That's going to be Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard now is taking over that number 1 spot in the Giants offense, especially in the passing game. Of course, Saquon Barkley going to be a magnet for points in the backfield, but Eli Manning is going to be looking to Shepard out on the wings to get some downfield play. They need to try to be able to substitute for Odell Beckham, and though there's no way to truly do that, those targets have to go somewhere. And with Evan Ingram at tight end, he's another good option, but really Sterling Shepard, the only wide receiver that's going to be capable of getting you some points in that Giants offense. He should be on tap for a good handful of looks. I could see 10, 11 targets going his way in that game, especially if the Cowboys offense is rolling early and often. They're going to have to go to that pass game a little quicker. Shepard's going to be tapped for a lot of those targets. And then the last wide receiver to really note before we begin Week 1 is going to be Kenny Golladay, the Detroit Lions wideout, a big man, 6'4", 220 pounder out on the wing there. He is a load. He's like a poor man's Calvin Johnson out there in Detroit. He can go up. He can win you those jump balls. And because of that, he's going to be a guy that's going to be targeted a lot by Stafford. They have Kerryon Johnson in the backfield, a really good, capable running back out of Auburn. He's looking to have a big third year, but it's going to be Golladay against an Arizona Cardinals secondary that does not have Patrick Peterson. He's suspended for the first few games of the season because of a drug test, so look for the Detroit Lions to try to exploit that weakness. Marvin Jones is back, but Golladay is a home run hitter in that offense, and he could get you just a couple big catches and really eat up some yards and get some fantasy points for you at that wide receiver 2 flex spot. As that's going to be it for our middle skill position, guys. We're going to come back after a short break and talk about your tight end, your defense scenarios when we return here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And as we jump back in here to the depths of the Week 1 fantasy football breakdown here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, we're going to look to the last pieces of your lineup here before Week 1 begins. We've talked about quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Now we're going to look at tight ends and some defensive matchups for you. If you're either not quite happy with the defensive matchup you've got going in, let's say you drafted Houston and you're looking at that Drew Brees offense in the Superdome and you're thinking you got to find another way, don't worry. We've got some options for you coming up. But first, we're going to touch on some tight ends here that are poised for a pretty solid matchup in Week week one. And even though they're not going to be any of the Holy Trinity, Kelsey, Kittle, or Ertz, you still are going to get some good points out of them, most likely, in the matchups in week one that could really give them an edge and give them a good start to the season. First things first, going to start at Monday Night Football. Darren Waller, the tight end, he had rave reviews from the Oakland Raiders coaching staff. He's going up against a Broncos team that can be susceptible to some tight end play. They're superstar defensive players from a couple years ago and a Super Bowl victory ago really are not there. Of course, they have Von Miller, but Miller more of a blitzing linebacker / edge rusher. He's really not going to be dropping in coverage too much. So Waller, a guy that can stretch the field. He's athletic. We saw what Jared Cook did in this offense a year ago for John Gruden, setting career highs in every major category. Darren Waller could be that next guy, that next tool for John Gruden in his arsenal. Of course, the Raiders with the huge question mark with Antonio Brown. Will he play? Will he not play? How much will he be used? Is he adept at the system? Is he ready to go? You don't really know, but look for Darren Waller to really grab some targets for the Raiders. As Derek Carr has proven time and again, he likes his tight ends as a safety valve. So Darren Waller has earned this spot, and he could be earning a spot on your fantasy starting lineup with a good week one here against the Broncos on Monday Night Football. And just to stay on Monday Night Football, if you have, like we said earlier, if you have a guy on the Saints, you might want to play him. Jared Cook, who is we just talked about being on the Raiders, setting all those career highs, has now moved on to being the number one tight end for New Orleans. He's a guy that I'm sure Drew Brees is itching to utilize, the 32-year-old tight end, all his athleticism with Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara taking so much attention. Look for Jared Cook to be getting loose up the middle. Could be hit on some deep posts, could be hit on some slants. He's a big body tight end with really, really good hands. Derek Carr would love to go to him in the clutch. Drew Brees could be going to him a couple times for some touchdowns here in that New Orleans Monday night game. Our next look for a tight end, we've talked about the Ravens being in such a good matchup against the Dolphins, and the tight end spot is no exception. It's going to be Mark Andrews, the tight end. This is a guy you could have drafted very low. There was a lot of hype in Baltimore camp about how good Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson were gelling. Jackson really looked to him as that safety valve option that when in doubt, just get it to Andrews. Is something that's in Jackson's head, so you could really play off of that and look for Lamar to be hunting his tight end throughout that game against the Dolphins. And with that defensive matchup against one of the worst teams in the NFL, Andrews could be poised for a big week one to really announce his presence after a couple good games last season where he and Jackson were clearly clicking. But the tight end position's tough in fantasy football. Of course, you have your Kelce's, your Ertz's, and your Kittles, and that's why those guys are drafted so high. Some people taking Kelce even in that late first round spot because you just want to win that position, and those three guys give you a chance every week to win the tight end spot. But after that, it's really about playing your matchups, touch and go. Evan Ingram's a guy that he's really not a sleeper. He's one of the second-tier tight ends who are looking for a big year after a less than stellar performance last season. You also can look at Hunter Henry coming back off that injury for the Chargers. We've seen it, what the Chargers like to do with their tight ends. Antonio Gates, a Hall of Fame career. Now he is gone. Hunter Henry's looking to fill those shoes. Can he do it? It'll start in his week one matchup, but he's a guy that you could definitely see giving you some good production against an Indianapolis Colts defense that does have all-pro linebacker Darius Leonard at that middle spot. But he most likely will be moving around Will Henry, and they're going to get him in the slot, get him chances to get some one-on-one matchups where he can exploit him, use his body to create some really big plays for that Chargers team, especially if they don't have Melvin Gordon. Phillip Rivers is going to be throwing the ball early and often. And now we're going to turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball for fantasy football, and this is where a couple points here and there can really make a difference for you at the defensive position. We've talked about a couple of these teams that I'm going to mention already in our last fantasy football podcast back on Wednesday, as the New York Jets and the Detroit Lions. The Jets getting the Bills, the Lions getting the Cardinals, and with Kyler Murray's first ever start in week one of his football career. You got to think the Lions are chomping at the bit. They're going to want to get after him. They're going to be pressuring the quarterback, trying to run that sack number up. They want to hit him hard and welcome him to the National Football League with the worst of intentions. And on the other side, the New York Jets with the Bills, Josh Allen trying to really grow as a quarterback, but it's going to be tough. Jamal Adams, that all-pro safety for the Jets, running that defense. They just made some big draft moves. They got Quinnen Williams in there to elevate the pass rush. So look for the Jets to really come out with a good defensive game plan, try to really stymie that Bills offense that just let go of Shady McCoy as well, so they're down one more weapon. All the more reason to look to the Jets to have a good week one. And then we go back to Philadelphia where the Eagles have the Redskins. Dwayne Haskins, the rookie quarterback. The Redskins offense that really just has no identity, no really big playmakers on that team. Darius Guice, the running back, looking like he's going to be the starter after being hurt all last season. Adrian Peterson had a fantastic season last year, eclipsing over 1,000 yards rushing, but looking like he's going to be taking a back seat to the Darius Guice, the LSU running back. Can he get it done in his first action? You don't really want to bet on that, so I would definitely advise looking to the Eagles, a defense that has been so good the last couple seasons, could be doing it again and getting off to a red-hot start against the Redskins. And then finally the Ravens, again with the Dolphins. You kind of just want to pick on the Dolphins this season. Week one, there's just no real way that they can be all systems go against a Ravens team where their offense has so many weapons. On the Dolphins side of things, they're really just trying to figure out where they're at. They're in such a transition period right now after the Tannehill experiment just really didn't work out for them at quarterback. They're trying to rebuild that team. So in fantasy football, it's all about matchups and taking advantage of those matchups. The Dolphins are going to be a team that you really want to take advantage of that matchup defensively. Make them beat you. It's going to be tough for them to really amass a lot of points. So look for the team in the Baltimore Ravens to really jump out week one, kind of hammer the Dolphins a little bit and grab you a lot of points if they can. But that's a real look around the league here for the Fantasy Football Podcast. We've talked about all the positions. You should be ready to go week one. We hope you have all the best of luck. It'll be a fun time. We're playing here as well. And we'll be back on Monday with more fantasy football coverage here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.